France and Spain have signaled their support to designate Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization, potentially paving the way for blacklisting it on an EU level. The two countries had until now expressed hesitation, but their shift could now help secure the majority needed in the EU for the designation. Once made official, the move would imply an asset freeze, a prohibition to provide funds, and a travel ban on all the Revolutionary Guard's members.
Une réflexion est en cours avec nos partenaires européens sur la désignation des gardiens de la Révolution comme organisation terroriste. À ce sujet, je veux être très claire, il n'y a aucun tabou.
The news comes as foreign affairs ministers meet in Brussels to discuss the issue. The decision by France and Spain comes days after Italy also shifted its stance towards approval. A new data showed the scale of Iran's brutal repression of street protests in recent weeks. The United States, Canada and Australia have already designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization.
The changes in the relationship between Europe and the United States are structural, not temporary. EU High Representative Kaja Kallas has warned on Wednesday against the dangers of outsourcing security in a new age of coercive power politics. Her remarks come on the heels of US President Donald Trump's attempt to seize Greenland from Denmark through punitive tariffs, an unprecedented dispute that brought the nearly 80-year-old transatlantic alliance to the brink of collapse.
Arguably, the biggest change in the fundamental reorientation is going on across the Atlantic, a rethinking that has shaken the transatlantic relationship to its foundation. Let me be very clear. We want strong transatlantic ties. The US will remain Europe's partner and ally, but Europe needs to adapt to new realities. Europe is no longer Washington's primary center of gravity. The shift has been ongoing for a while.
Kallas also presented a bleak overview of the current state of international affairs. She labeled Russia a major security threat, China a long-term challenge, and the Middle East a completely unpredictable region. Since Trump's re-election, the European Union has rolled out several multi-billion initiatives to rapidly boost defense spending, promote its domestic industry, and reduce its deep-rooted reliance on US-made weapons. The bloc has set 2030 as a collective deadline to achieve full defense readiness and deter a potential Russian attack on an EU member state.
French President Emmanuel Macron said on Wednesday that the recent standoff with the US over Greenland served as a, quote, wake-up call for all of Europe. The French leader made the remarks as he hosted the Danish and Greenlandic prime ministers in Paris for a working lunch to discuss the situation and what's to come, now that US President Donald Trump has seemingly backed off. Macron acknowledged the threat that persists in the Arctic and pledged his country's commitment to strengthening the region's defenses.
Face à la posture russe dans le Grand Nord, à la présence économique de la Chine, aux conséquences stratégiques de ce rapprochement, nous partageons la nécessité de renforcer notre posture de défense dans l'Arctique. Plusieurs États européens, dont la France, ont commencé à le faire dans le cadre des exercices conjoints dits Arctic Endurance, à la demande du Danemark.
Danish Premier Mette Frederiksen emphasized that NATO must also increase its capacity in the Arctic.
The three of us agree that this is a priority and that NATO must play a much stronger role in the Arctic region, in the High North, including in and around Greenland, something we have been actually requesting for a long time.
Greenland's Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen encouraged the cooperation.
Our close cooperation in this situation is not only about Greenland. It goes beyond Greenland. For us, this is about the values in the world, our democracy, respect for international law and order, and integrity.
The meeting comes just days after Trump halted his annexation threats of Greenland, announcing that NATO had agreed to a future Arctic deal. Trump offered few details of the deal, which was brokered with NATO boss Mark Rutte on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum last week, saying they were still being worked out.
EU Defence Commissioner Andrius Kubilius has said that he agrees with NATO Chief Mark Rutte that the EU relies on the US for nuclear protections, but that it can and should work towards becoming independent in conventional defence. He was responding to comments made by Rutte on Monday that the EU should keep on dreaming of becoming independent from the US in matters of security and defence.
In one media, I saw that he was speaking about nuclear defense. That Europeans should, stop dreaming about possibility to, to defend itself without American nuclear umbrella. So this is really, I agree with him. For time being, at least, in Commission, we really this is a business for member states to decide what's about nuclear umbrella. But Americans said in a very clear way that they are ready to keep this umbrella, and we are happy with that.
According to Kubilius, conventional defense is the area where Europe needs to be ready to defend itself. A practical example of this is to find a solution to replace up to 100,000 active duty personnel that the US Army currently has stationed throughout Europe. Kubilius insisted that the EU needs to understand what exactly it would need to replace if the US decides to diminish its presence on the European continent. Another question that remains unanswered for the moment is when this would be possible, and to that question the Commissioner admitted he couldn't provide a clear timeline. German federal police searched the offices of Deutsche Bank in Frankfurt and Berlin on Wednesday morning in what Frankfurt public prosecutors have said is an investigation into suspected money laundering.
Ich würde sagen, das passt zum Image der Deutschen Bank. Also es gab viele Geschichten immer wieder. Deutsche Bank.
Kann jede Bank verwickelt werden. Die Kunden sind privat. Da kann viel passieren, weiß man nicht.
Authorities have said they are investigating unnamed employees of the bank, which is suspected to have had conducted business dealings with foreign companies that were used in money laundering.
Wie deutsche Medien berichten, stehen die Durchsuchungen offenbar in Zusammenhang mit dem russischen Oligarchen Roman Abramowitsch. Abramowitsch steht seit Anfang 2022 auf der EU-Sanktionsliste. Die Staatsanwaltschaft hat sich noch nicht näher dazu geäußert. Laura Fleischmann aus Berlin für euronews.
Belarus became the latest country to join US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace initiative. In a statement on X, the Board of Peace said it welcomes Belarus as a founding member of our growing international organization. It is unclear whether Minsk paid the $1 billion fee to secure permanent membership for Belarus. The Belarusian Foreign Ministry said in a statement last week Minsk was prepared to take an active role in shaping a new architecture of global and regional security. More than 20 countries have agreed to join Donald Trump's Board of Peace. The initiative has expanded beyond its original remit of overseeing the Gaza ceasefire to what Trump describes as broader conflict mediation. EU sanctions have been imposed on President Alexander Lukashenko's government following the disputed 2020 presidential election and violent crackdown on protesters and dissidents. Further measures were introduced after the country allowed Russia to use its territory to launch its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in early 2022.
Trucks full of aid supplies and blankets have entered the Gaza Strip via the Rafah border crossing with Egypt on Wednesday. The trucks headed to the Kerem Shalom crossing for Israeli inspection, where they'll wait for clearance to be allowed in. It comes after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Tuesday that he'll reopen the crossing in both directions after nearly 2 years of closure. The opening was announced after Israel confirmed in recent days that it had received the remains of the final Israeli hostage in Gaza, a sticking point that has left the border closed, despite a US-brokered ceasefire being in effect. Netanyahu did not say when the crossing in the enclave's southernmost city would open, but did say it would be limited to foot traffic and not be used for cargo. The Israeli premier announced that Palestinians will be, quote, freely allowed to enter or exit the besieged territory. Palestinians see the Rafah crossing as their link to the world, their only way out and the only way in for critical aid, desperately needed to replenish a population ravaged by 2 years of war. The opening has raised hopes that tens of thousands of Palestinians in need of medical care will finally be able to receive it, and tens of thousands who left during the war can return home.
U.S. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar was attacked with an unknown substance at a town hall she was hosting on Tuesday when an audience member used a syringe to spray liquid at her, Minneapolis police said. Omar, the Minnesota representative, was uninjured and the man was immediately arrested. She continued the town hall for about 25 more minutes after the man was ushered out by security, saying she would not be intimidated. Police said that forensics were being conducted at the scene. The attack took place as Omar called for the abolishment of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and for Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to resign or face impeachment after the deaths of 2 people in Minnesota at the hands of ICE. U.S. President Donald Trump has frequently criticized Omar and stepped up verbal attacks on her in recent months as he turned his focus on Minneapolis, calling her garbage in a cabinet meeting in December. In 2019, Omar became the first Somali American, the first African-born American, and one of the first 2 Muslim American women to serve in the U.S. Congress.